And somebody was telling me on the first day with a lot of elation that definitely it's a good start to the COP by having so many millions of dollars pledged on loss and damage fund. It was almost 3 million per minute. That was the rate of pledging. But then compared. Oh, I need to speak closer. Great. Okay. So I was saying 3 million per minute or more. Perhaps it's as of now the rate has increased, but at the same time we are losing $2 billion per day because of disasters, and $1.7 trillion of fossil fuel subsidy being given per year, all added up together. Not really making a lot of progress. Too little, too late. But let's come back to GGA. So basically, the water-related disasters are increasing at a very high rate as of now, and also responsible for globally affected population. So that has been a starting point. But then water is also a limiting factor. The excess of water results in one kind of disaster, and the deficit of water results in another kind of disaster. If we monitor water well, it leads us to better early warning systems. And just yesterday, we launched the second iteration of the Global Status Report and Early Warning System. It was launched by the SG. I had the honor of being the lead author for that. We have also launched a dashboard on this system, and you will see that the early warning system as a key adaptive measure is also coming up very strongly in the targets and indicators. So just to quickly introduce what Sendai framework is about, it basically has one goal, 7 targets, 38 indicators. One goal, reducing vulnerability, enhancing resilience. So very much similar to the goal or target of adaptation. We have 7 targets, 4 looking into reducing the impact of disaster, and 3 looking into enhancing investment into risk reduction measures. To be done through 4 priorities for action: enhancing risk understanding, enhancing governance, increasing investments in disaster risk reduction, and better preparedness. So top is the goal, 7 targets, 4 priorities for action. Outcome, output, input. That's how the whole framework is structured. And this is what I'm saying. When we set up a M&E framework for any global mechanism or even a project for that case, we need to answer 3 questions. What do we need to do? What is being done? And what is the result of our action? And those are the 3 key things that develops and leads us into developing a framework where the first informs the latter. The monitoring mechanism comes in between. So I have 3 key messages for this specific discussion. First, one of the key things that we realized in the era preceding the Sendai framework, so between 2005 to 15, we had a different framework called the Hyogo framework for action. And there we were monitoring our actions. So we were saying, okay, if we have good early warning system, if we have good governance, if we have good investment, maybe everything will be good. And that's what we kept monitoring over 10 years. 10 years later, in 2015, when we did an evaluation of the Hyogo framework, we realized that every country has said they have done very well in their investment into global disaster risk reduction, but at the same time, disasters have also increased. So just doing things right doesn't let right things happen. And that was the key lesson we learned from Hyogo framework. And this is where we thought that perhaps if we set a global goal and global target, but then let the countries decide what pathway they want to adopt to reach that target or the global goal, that might make better sense. So in the Sendai framework, which is starting 2015, globally we are not monitoring what each country is doing for resilience building or risk reduction. What we are monitoring is how much of mortality is declining in each country, how much affected population are, how much of loss and damage are declining in each country, and how much are they investing in governance, early warning, and so on. But we're not saying this is exactly you have to do in each of the country, because each country's development pathway, risk reduction pathway / adaptation pathway will be different. So the country has the flexibility to decide what they want to do. They have their national strategies, in this case NAP. They decide the M&E framework using NAPs, or in our case DRR plan, and then they contribute to the global outcome level targets. That is one thing which we really learned the lesson from the Hyogo framework and implemented in the Sendai framework. So basically at the global level, we monitor the outcomes of the action. At the national level, we let countries decide what they want to do to achieve the same common goal of the world. Second key message is something what was mentioned in the opening itself, is that what is that common denominator through which we can see that the global progress is being made. The aggregation of whatever we are doing, if we cannot put them all together, if we can't aggregate them, the global goes out of the toss. It doesn't really work. And hence, we need some level of standardization and some factors in place to be able to say that we are globally being going on the right direction. So, what are the key factors? One, we need the universal applicability so that we can compare indicators across time and space. That's one very important component. The second is about the quantification itself. So when people have their views on it, there are very strong quantitative school of thought, a very strong qualitative school of thought. It has to be a mix of the two to come up with some level of a global understanding. But to the extent possible, in indexing of a set of indicators leading to one factor at the end might help in some level of global comparison. We do that for all the targets in the Sendai framework. We have one figure of global mortality. We have one figure for the world and affected population. We have one score on the risk governance. We have one score for early warning system. And all of these are reported officially by the governments. So we can say whether when the SG said that the global score for early warning system has increased from 0.37 to 0.43, we could say globally that has been an increase in one of the adaptive actions. We can say that only because we could index the whole thing into one score. So that's globally, if you are saying something, then that's something which is a key important thing. The second thing is that we need to have the right standards. We often miss this not so exciting part, the very technical part of the domain of statisticians, methodological standards, terminologies, and so on. If each country follows its own methodology, each country follows its own data standard, each country follows its own terminology, we can't aggregate them at the global level. That's a key problem that we have often faced. So I'll come to that how we have managed to address some of these challenges. The third key message, what was also said earlier, let's build upon what already exists. So for example, under Sendai framework, when the Sendai framework's terminology and indicators being framed, the SDG frame indicators were also being framed. And we had this understanding with the interagency expert group of the SDG and the open-ended intergovernmental expert group of Sendai framework that we combine our indicators. So the countries do not report on specific indicators of SDG 1, 11, and 13. They report only on Sendai. We combine those information and submit it to SDG as part of the SDG reporting system. That reduces the reporting burden of countries, and also it also ensures that we are talking about the same thing, same value, same methodology when it comes to the global variables. Again, SDG 6 here, which is the topic of the discussion, comes in the center because of the factors I mentioned earlier. Water being the limiting factor, water-related disasters being the maximum impactful for us. Moving forward, we also have seen something interesting happening. After the SDGs endorsed some of the Sendai framework, we also saw other intergovernmental mechanisms coming up, Samava Pathway, the New Urban Agenda, and so on. They also did not develop specific indicators. They just told us, can we borrow your indicators? And they just borrowed our indicators from Sendai framework, and countries again do not report on those indicators for all these intergovernmental mechanisms. They just mention to Sendai, and we do it for them. So the process we have followed so far, and I'll conclude with that, I'll not go into each of the details. Sendai framework, we had the indicators 2 years later, and those are the two official UNGA endorsed processes. Alignment between Sendai and SDG, what just I mentioned. We did a very interesting exercise in 2017 before we embarked on the whole process, was to do a data readiness. For each of the 400 indicators that we had at that point of time, what is the quality, quantity, status, standard in each of the countries? And from 400, we went down to 38 because we wanted to be practical. We wanted baseline. We wanted to have all the information. We developed the right methodologies. We have established a portal. We are investing a lot into disaster-related statistics to have the right standards in place through the Statistical Commission. We have just launched a couple of years back a data standard for hazards. 302 hazards have been standardized through an International Science Council process. And those hazards are ones that the countries will be using. So when we say something, it means the same across all the countries. And then we are following with technical assistance because capacity building is a key process on the whole thing. Countries do not have the capacity. So that's something which I will end with, but my lasting message is basically we need to have the goals and targets as much as qualitative, high level as possible, and the indicators can be as quantified, as smart as possible. I would also reiterate what I told in the 6th workshop of GGA, Goal setting is a strategic political process. Indicator setting is a technical process. Don't mix up the two. That has been my message again and again. Secondly, we measure progress outcome level globally. We implement nationally, and that's something which, again, we need to keep in mind. Very important, we get very ambitious and move forward towards setting up very fancy indicators. It's a very exciting process, but countries do not have the data. We do not have the data, we don't measure them. At the end, we will end up with something saying, okay, we did not achieve enough. And this is something which we keep facing even in projects, including early warnings for all. But basically, we need to be having a trade-off between ambition and realism. We also need to, as I said, leverage lessons from existing. Don't make the mistakes we have made 10 years ago. So that's something which we keep repeating. And finally, invest in data standards, and let's co-learn and let's co-share our data standards, because if every time each mechanism develops its own data standards, own terminologies, own methodologies, there is no standard. So thanks a lot for this, and happy to discuss further. I will have to unfortunately leave after some time, but my colleague Carlos will be there to take it from you. Thank you very much.
Maybe just since you have to leave, let me ask if anyone has any questions for Animesh before he leaves. Marcia. Yeah, just so everyone can.
Sorry, all right. Sorry for that. My name is Marcia Toledo. I work with the High-Level Climate Champions. And one question that I have is if you can help understand what are the gaps that you find in that data reporting from the national level governments on actions taken by non-state actors. How are the processes to close that gap in absorbing, uptaking that information, and what opportunities exist to better integrate also the work that non-state actors are doing?
Go ahead. Unless there's any other questions.
No, thanks. That's a very good question. It's always a trade-off that we have to see in official processes, because it's an official statistics, and our statistics become official statistics when reported by the governments. We expect, and this is something which is there in Sendai framework, very clearly outlined in a very specific big paragraph with each role of each of the stakeholders outlined, saying that the governments have to work with the non-state stakeholders to implement Sendai framework, because we believe governance is not just about governments. That's very important. At the same time, I do see that their civil society and other non-state stakeholders have a lot of role to play in strengthening the data ecosystem that we talk about. One thing which is a clear gap in Sendai framework process, and by extension SDG process, is that we have 157 countries currently reporting on Sendai framework, of which only 65 are reporting on disaggregated data disaggregated by sex, age, disability, income, for example. If we don't have the right level of disaggregation, we don't understand the intersectionality of interventions. If we don't understand intersectionality, developmental approaches would always remain at a high level and not address the real vulnerability. And that is something where we really see the role of the civil society, because that data exists with them in most cases. So data disaggregation could become a key measure to move this forward. I also feel that there has to be some kind of a check and balance of official statistics from the civil society. And I always encourage our own stakeholder engagement mechanisms, like the Global Network of Disaster Reduction, which has 1,500 NGOs in their network. They come out every 2 years with a report called The Views from the Frontline, VFL, where they criticize us, say this official statistics says good progress is being made. We feel it is not the case, and this is it. And the totality of what reports like these say and what official statistics say goes into our global platform that happens every 3 years, and we say this is the totality of progress. So I think there has to be some level of check and balance from both sides. Whether to include that data into the official statistics could be a different discussion, because that has its own implications as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Animesh. Excellent points. Every time I hear you speak, I get a new insight and jot down pages of notes. So thank you for that. We're going to move on. Our next speaker is Alvin Chandra from UN Environment Program. He is the global adaptation, he's the global coordinator for adaptation policy and partnerships and oversees the Global Adaptation Network, which I highly recommend everyone joins if you're not a member already. And I won't go into his distinguished background because we'll be here for a while. But Alvin, please come on up. And now I'll ask the rest of the panelists to come up so that now Alvin won't be sitting by himself. Oh, you have a presentation as well? Okay. Never mind. After.
It does help to have a presentation when you've got a marathon of different side events that are being, you're running from one to another. I must admit that, look, is this good enough? Okay. I am delivering this presentation on behalf of our SDG teams and the Biodiversity, the CBD Secretariat. So I have one slide to share in terms of how these synergies could be built. UNEP's involvement, of course, in the global goals space has been supporting the 8 mandated workshops, also providing technical, scientific, thematic inputs into many of the targets that are being proposed from a environment nature nexus. And a lot of targets that are being thought of, particularly from the ecosystem, different types of ecosystems have been talked about in the global goals space, from freshwater, mountains, to looking at oceans, etc. You know, so we've been providing a lot of technical scientific inputs. I think the big key message that I have over this process is what we've shared is that the anchoring stone, particularly for water-related ecosystems, are the approaches and the dimensions that have been talked about in the global goals, and this being nature-based solutions and ecosystem-based approaches. So just as an example, where we are in terms of process, and Christina basically, she gave us an outline of process. We haven't, in the global goals space, haven't come up with the framework is under development. There is a menu of very different types of targets that have been proposed that cuts across very different themes, very different dimensions, and thought of course, from a process side around the iterative adaptation cycle. So right from the vulnerability risk assessment right to planning, implementation, etc. And so one of the big message we have in terms of how this could leverage on the global biodiversity, the Kunming-Montreal framework is really an opportunity for the global goals to leverage thematic targets that are developed by the GBAF and ensure that climate and adaptation work is quite relevant. So in the development of the global biodiversity framework, we looked at the SDG related targets and just to give you an idea of where this actually sits for the water related ones, there are very specific targets under the SDG around water. In terms of tracking freshwater ecosystems, in terms of looking at the quality, quantity of freshwater, and that basically was an input into the GBAF targets, particularly around restoration of degraded ecosystems, particularly for inland waters. Now, to make that a little bit more operational, different typologies of inland water ecosystems were used, and in this case, we used the IUCN typologies, and that made the GBAF targets a little bit more operational. So again, leveraging on the SDG targets and the IUCN typologies, we were able to do this. This also goes on to something that Animesh mentioned. These are processes that are already existing, and time we've heard from member states around reducing reporting burdens, particularly across different conventions. So from SDG to the CBD, from the Sendai, now making a link. So that's one of the things we've been very consistent in our submissions and also the messaging across the workshops on building these processes. Second, around ambition and realism. Okay, so this is where I would like to differ a little bit from what Animesh had said. Adaptation is a lot about ambition, but it's also about action. So think of the global goals and adaptation as a business plan for adaptation. Mitigation has very specific ambition, very easy to measure and track, but for adaptation, because it's very localized, it's very hard for us to come up with, what adaptation means. I really feel that this is a moment to push ambition. So what if we've achieved all the SDGs? What if we've achieved all the global biodiversity targets? What if we've achieved, the Sendai targets? What does it then mean for adaptation goals? What are we left with? So what we are left with is an ambition. And what we are seeing from the UNEP gap adaptation reports is over the years, adaptation gaps beyond the finance gaps, those around implementation, those around planning, that around risk assessment, those gaps are increasing, and simply because the enabling conditions, technical support, financial support, those gaps are increasing in light of climate risks. What we are seeing from IPCC, particularly for water-related ecosystems, water-related hazards, hydromet hazards, these are basically increasing, and for me, it's really about pushing the ambition, and that's where the global goals would really make a difference. What I'm hearing, of course, from member states as we're coming out of the negotiations is that ambition has to be on the table beyond just finance. I think that's one other message that I would have. Another thing I would probably say, and just looking at this, is really balancing in terms of the outcomes versus the impacts, and particularly in the global goals related work. We've been talking, Christina, a lot about the processes, the process related targets for the global goals. So to make the connection around water, if you look at the draft report, there's a menu of very different overarching targets, and one of the key ones is by a certain year, reducing vulnerability and enhancing long-term resilience and adaptive capacity. One of the things in this proposed target is conserving a certain percentage of land, freshwater, and ocean ecosystems. We have over 70 different adaptation projects in 50 countries. It's a huge portfolio, and targets like this, they are not easily realized. The time scale in terms of realizing particularly restoration-related targets for land, freshwater, and ocean ecosystems cannot happen within a 5 or 6 year project. It is just difficult to measure. So my message on this one is that we need a very long-term time scale, possibly pushing to a 2050, 2070 that also aligns with the IPCC scenarios as well. And that helps with the tracking of the impacts. Now, on the process-based related targets, this is where the adaptation targets that are being set for the iterative adaptation cycle kicks in. So countries are now preparing in very different stages of preparing the national adaptation plans. And from memory, there's over 45 countries that have submitted their NAPs. And large majority of LDCs and SIDS are in very formative stages. So between UNEP and UNDP, we're supporting 70 plus countries with the national adaptation plans. One of the key sectors we are seeing in terms of planning for adaptation is water, agriculture, biodiversity, ecosystems, and then infrastructure, followed by health. The last one varies for different countries. And water is cross-cutting across all these different sectors. For a process-based indicator that actually actually builds on what countries are doing in terms of developing their NEP, it would require a certain bit of, let's say, looking at a sample aggregation of water-related indicators that are coming from NEPs. It is also highly likely that if we do set in place a process-based indicator for national adaptation plan, which I hear that some countries are pushing for 2030, that gives a really good idea of what type of monitoring evaluation systems would be developed at the national level to track sectoral-led adaptation actions. So I think, the message over here is for the water sector or agriculture sector being able to balance in the targets of the GGA between the process-based versus the impact ones. Indicators, I really do not see how we'd actually get to the indicators in the global goals list, and Animesh kind of reiterated that. What we would suggest is it's a very technical scientific work. It's not a political exercise of setting targets, but this has to be science-informed, science-based, and this could be a follow-up work under the GGA process. Look, in the water sector, it's about too much water, floods, storm surges, or it could be about too little water, so droughts, water scarcity, etc. And really, one of the tying elements that I see in the global goals and adaptation, and I mentioned that in the 7th workshop, was around transboundary cooperation. So initiatives like integrated water resource management or regional cooperation that's happening around transboundary water resources would be a key enabler for international cooperation and transboundary cooperation within the global goals. I do have 5 messages, and basically this is from my team in terms of linking the GBAF process, SDG process in the GGA. The first is really in terms of indicators, as I mentioned, we really got to work hard on this. It has to be a combination of new ones, but it could also be synthesized from the SDG and the GBAF frameworks. Second, crucially, as countries are developing the national adaptation plans, and there is absolutely no political nudge to this or no spin to it. The means of implementation really has to be defined, and countries are, they are experiencing challenges, not just their formulation of the NEPs, but also implementation as well. So the means of implementation from the GBAF targets, particularly 20, 21, and 19, was broadened beyond just finance to look at capacity building, technology transfer, knowledge management, etc., and that could be a contributor. Third, monitoring evaluation system, and my colleagues from the GGA circle would support this. Strengthening of monitoring evaluation systems is quite useful, and lessons from GBAF would be quite important, particularly as we are thinking about the NEP-related targets. So one of the things we find from the UNEP GAP report is the weakest component of the adaptation cycle is really monitoring and evaluation, and as low as 8% of SIDS have developed their MELs for adaptation. So it's a crucial area of support. Country-driven, locally led approaches are quite important for water-related adaptation support. Adaptation is very localized. Within, you walk, I come from Pacific, so you work from one village to another, and the adaptation solutions can differ. So locally led approaches would be quite important. I did mention balancing between the process and impact-based targets. So for me, these are some of the key lessons in terms of articulating the links between the SDG, the GBAF process, around the what's being thought of in the global goals. And one of the key tying element for the water-related sector is really nudging into the dimension of nature-based solutions and ecosystem-based approaches, where you have some common tying areas for the global goals, SDGs, and the GBAF. And I will stop over there, Christina. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was a tour de force, and I love that you ended on the 5 key lessons learned and recommendations. I'm really gonna invite our panelists to come up on stage, starting with Marcia Toledo. Marcia is the Department Director for Adaptation and Resilience with the UN High-Level Champions. And I'll introduce in turn, if you don't mind. But Marcia, I'll start with you. You have an adaptation action agenda, Sharm el-Sheikh adaptation action agenda, that has a number of targets in it related to adaptation. Tell us what they are, how they were developed, and how they're used, if you don't mind, briefly.
Supposed to do something? Oh, it works. Thank you very much. Maybe 1 minute on what are the champions and how do we work in the development of the Sharm el-Sheikh adaptation agenda. So the high-level champions are appointed by the COP presidencies. We have COP27 presidency UN climate change high-level champions Mahmoud Mohildin, and COP28 presidency UN climate change high-level champion Rassan Al-Mubarak. The champions work with a team that supports the engagements, and we have in last year, COP22, we brought the Sharm el-Sheikh adaptation agenda in support of COP27 presidency objective to bring a global actionable agenda of adaptation solutions. The important part there is that it was elevated and brought by COP27 presidency, and the champions are carrying that agenda forward. So now COP28 presidency in this COP has confirmed carrying it forward. Oh yeah, perfect. And the agenda of solutions is very much bringing, identifying what are those specific solutions that are proven that can help accelerate adaptation at the local level. And what are the specific systems that are critical to bring forward and to drive system transformation? So the Sharm el-Sheikh adaptation agenda is very much at the solution level, expecting that to deliver adaptation, as we heard earlier in this session. You cannot necessarily do it from one angle, but multiple different approaches are needed, multiple different solutions are needed. So we have food and agriculture, we have oceans, we have water and nature, which are cross-cutting. We have human settlements, health, and infrastructure. And like we have cross-cutting systems, water and nature, we have also cross-cutting enablers, planning and finance. The reason as well, the opportunity for those enablers that beyond their own and mobilization, actionable, let's say, targets to really gear action from public, private, insurance, MDBs, at the same time, planning for industries, for cities, for regions, for different stakeholders, so that we can accelerate solution implementation, planning, and at the same time, finance. So that's the spirit of the Sharm el-Sheikh adaptation agenda. In regards of the solutions, how they were identified, was very much articulating already existent, justified solutions that many different actors have been working with. For example, I'll bring a very, very practical example, which is in the systems of oceans, we have a strong clarity of what needs to be done to enable the capacity, for example, for mangroves to deliver food security, coastal flood protection, many other, of course, services that are critical for adaptation. And those targets in regards of the area and in regards of mobilization and finance were recognized by the Sharm el-Sheikh agenda and incorporated. In the case of water, what we did was brought as well, I don't know if we have my slide. Oh, this is great. There's probably the last slide that will be the relevant for the number, yes. So no, the previous to the last, yes, thank you. Those are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 targets identified at the level of solutions or actions that are needed, and some of them are more specific, target quantitatively clear, and some others are more what needs to happen, and we want to make sure that in the Sharm el-Sheikh it's reflected. And then you will see alignments to conservation, the biodiversity framework, you will see alignment on planning, informing, strengthening systems so that we can have the connection, including WASH in this case. So the process, how this is identified is definitely the Sharm el-Sheikh agenda is an agenda informed by the solutions implemented by non-state actors, but it's an agenda that has potential to very much align and work and contribute to government's agenda. So we are really seeking that contribution and a joint objective working together, governments and non-state actors. In that sense, that's the mandate of the high-level champions, is bringing the power of the implementation of the non-state actors close and in ambition loop with the governments with joint objectives. So for the objectives of the water, what we also learned during this consultation, this discussion, we formed task forces and we brought different actors to inform those targets. We recognize that it's not possible, at least for now on the Sharm el-Sheikh agenda, that is an agenda until 2030, to have targets that are written in stone. We have to ensure that they are co-created, that they are co-owned, and even if they are high level in some ways, because of course implementing those solutions might be different in one country to the other or one locality to the other, is the opportunity to have these aspirational, near-term actionable targets that can drive the action so that the adaptation is localized and can be, of course, tracked, and there's opportunity to have impact at the local level. It's more trying to make it manageable. What are those opportunities that can create a positive cycle of adaptation? So action and adaptation.
Super, thank you. Well, just one quick follow-up question. And are you going to track them?
So yes, thank you for that question. So the Sharm el-Sheikh agenda is, at this point, is definitely not seeking to replicate what others are doing, but is seeking to connect and interlink information, but as well, there is an analysis at the signals of change at the system level, where we are starting to work. And this has been advanced this year, but it will be actually go deeper next year. That means, what are the signals of change that we can consider there is progress at the level of the system, where all these different solutions are implemented, that we can say policy have been shifted, finance is mobilized, collaboration partnerships are being formed, and other categories of macro signals of progress. At the level of the outcomes, yes, there is also this year that we've ground truth the, let's say, the indicators or the targets, and we refine them and enhance them with support of many different actors. We are seeking to have clarity what is the baseline of each of them. So we have completed that ground truthing and start tracking progress. Is that happening? Which elements can help us say, yes, we're moving on this indicator 30% forward, we're stuck at the other one, what are the barriers? And that's the ultimate, and probably that's the last slide, the ultimate purpose of the agenda is to convene the actors for implementation, understand the barriers and resolve them, support that different discussions needed to address the implementation.
Super, thank you so much. Actually, next I'm going to go to Joseph, if you don't mind passing it down.
Of course.
Joseph. Joseph Imbinji, did I say that right?
Yes, sir.
Please correct me if I'm wrong. Joseph is the Water National Adaptation Plan Manager of Zambia. And Zambia has really been innovative, first in the world in creating a national water adaptation plan. So really some groundbreaking work there. And I want to ask you, why did Zambia choose to develop a water-specific adaptation plan process? And then B, do you have targets in it? What sorts of targets, and how do you use them? And I know those are big questions, but I'm going to ask you to be a little succinct.
Thank you very much. I hope I'm clear. Yes, I'm going to talk a bit about the NAP process in Zambia. Maybe just to give a bit of a background. Zambia began developing its national adaptation plan mid-2020 with the support of the Green Climate Fund and support from Global Water Partnership as a delivery partner. So the process has moved very well, and just last month we're doing a launch. So this is an overarching adaptation plan, which is focusing on 9 priority sectors that were identified as the most impacted by climate change, and water is one of them. So then we are now going to phase 2, which is now concerned with development of a water-specific national adaptation plan. So you've asked me why the country felt we needed to have a water-specific adaptation plan. Firstly, the NAP for the water sector was meant to fill in a gap, because at the moment as a country we do not have a key strategic framework for building resilience in the water sector. So firstly is to serve that purpose. But secondly is also to address a wide range of capacity issues to enable implementation of adaptation actions in the water sector. So it's a wide range of capacity issues, ranging from issues of designing and implementation of adaptation actions, but also capacity to coordinate issues of climate change in the water sector, as well as basically vertical, and horizontal, coordination arrangements, and then also to do with building capacity to increase uptake of science in decision making for adaptation planning as well as implementation. And then also is to deal with capacity issues related to mobilizing financial resources, or as well as tracking in the water sector, and also it's also issues around tracking and reporting on adaptation progress being made in the water sector. So it's really a wide range of capacity issues that this water NAP is trying to focus on. So basically it's a readiness adaptation plan. And for us, we see having a global goal on adaptation with clear targets, indicators, and matrices are very critical because it will help us track and report progress that we are making in the water sector. And some of these indicators should also include means of implementation, because this is very critical in having successful implementation and achievement of the GGA. And so far, we've started doing some work arising from the initial or the first phase of the National Adaptation Plan, which is focusing on the 9 sectors to do a MEO framework. Mm-hmm. And we've identified some, indicators, but mostly they sit at output level. We have a few also at outcome level, but we had a challenge to deal with higher level indicators at impact level, because in the absence of an agreed, framework at a higher level in terms of the measure in the GGA, it becomes very difficult to see how to frame those, indicators. So this is a process that we feel once it's completed, it will help us complete our MEO framework, which we are going to be using to, monitor and report progress on adaptation. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a really important point. Just hold on to the mic for 1 second. I'm going to ask you a follow-up question, a really brief one. But it's interesting that you're saying we're actually waiting for this GGA framework to help us to latch onto it, to be able to use it and develop these outcomes. And I think that's a point that is not apparent to all negotiators, and an important message coming from this discussion. I guess any other key messages that you'd like to give to the negotiators in the rooms later today?
Well, maybe just to the issue of indicates as to do with means of implementation. I think for us as a developing country, those are very, very important, because if we don't have, we don't build capacity, we do not have the financing, you can't, succeed in terms of implementation.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's need to agree around having such indicators as we complete the framework on the GGA.
Super. Thank you. Thank you so much, Joseph.
Thank you.
I wouldn't mind passing the microphone. Kate, I'm going to come to you next. Kate is a senior advisor with the World Health Organization. She's the sanitation and waste team leader within the WASH team at the WHO in Geneva, Switzerland, and responsible for translating evidence to policy and practice through the WHO guidelines. And of course, those guidelines really set global targets and global practice in many ways. So I guess I'd like to ask you from your perspective, and we've heard a little bit from the SDG and SDG 6 in particular, what do you think the global goal on adaptation can take and learn from what already exists in the WASH community? And maybe some advice or anything more that you think needs to be done from an adaptation perspective.
Sure, and you may have sort of got from my bio, I actually look at the kind of evidence-based stuff at WHO, which underpins all of our monitoring work. So of course we want monitoring to measure what we know works. So I'm in some ways in this conversation, I'm linking with my colleagues in the Joint Monitoring Programme and GLASS, who have for a really long time, it's been nearly 30 years for the JMP and over 12 years for the GLASS, being measuring progress against what was the MDGs and now the SDGs and what will follow. So I think that the takeaway message here is that the JMP and the GLASS are both see it as a priority thing to be working on, as adapting those global monitoring methods for the GGA.
Sorry, just because we have a diverse group here, JMP and GLASS.
Oh, sorry, yes, okay, so that's the top line message, they're working on it. So who are they? The JMP is the Joint Monitoring Programme that is jointly led by WHO and UNICEF. It measures SDG 6.1 and 6.2. So that's the outcome monitoring, what access to water supply and sanitation and hygiene services do people have at home, at schools and healthcare facilities. The GLASS looks at enabling environment factors. So that's things like the policy environment, finance, human resources, regulation, capacity in the sector. And the JMP covers, I think, over 180 countries. The GLASS round of GLASS covered 120 countries. GLASS, in fact, actually already includes quite a lot of data on climate resilience. So you can go into the GLASS data portal and download country files for 122 countries and pull out the policy and financing data related to climate in there. So that train is moving and they will expand on that. But together, JMP and GLASS are embarking on a process to develop these additional indicators. And I really appreciate the comment earlier that was saying, this is not a sort of a strategic or a political process, it's a highly technical process that involves a lot of consultation. So what they are going to be starting on, the request for proposals will go out very soon, and they'll be seeking a catalogue of definitions, tools and indicators. Then they'll be working to prioritise those into measurable indicators, and then piloting some of those, working towards having a new climate resilient indicators within whatever goals and targets come after the SDGs.
That's fascinating. We have a bunch of people who have to go. Please go ahead. Alvin, did you want to make a final point? Yes.
Okay, so I know this is a bit unfair that I'm leaving in the midst of the panel, but I do have other engagements. And just as we speak, the draft text for the global goals has come out, and the first target is basically on water-related ecosystems, achieving universal access to safe and affordable potable water and a climate-resilient water supply and sanitation, and significantly climate-induced water scarcity and enhancing. So, the fact that water ecosystems and water-related disasters and hazards is the first target in the global goals, it's quite an achievement. So this is the draft text, of course, as this will go into the negotiations quite a lot, and it's very ambitious, achieving this by 2030.
Oh, quite. That's fantastic. Thank you, Alvin, for reading that out and for following up on that. It yeah, made my spine tingle. That's great. We still have a couple panelists, and we will open it up for discussions. But I want to turn to our last speaker, Rachel Terry. Sorry, give me 1 second. I'm having technical difficulties. There we go. Rachel is the head of sustainability at Van Oord, which is a corporation, and you'll tell us more about what you do. She's a coastal engineer, a civil and coastal engineer by training, and has worked on and is the lead for head of sustainability for Van Oord. I would love to hear from a corporate perspective, and I know you don't speak for all corporates everywhere, but I'm always intrigued because we don't get to speak to each other very much outside of these wonderful fora. How do you use targets in your project work? How do you develop them? How do you use them? And listening to this conversation, is there anything that comes to mind that you want to see reflected in this global goal on adaptation?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, indeed, to reiterate, I do not speak on behalf of the entire corporate sector, but maybe to explain, Van Oord is a family-owned Dutch company, and we work in the marine sector. And fundamentally, we're an implementation partner for resilient solutions for coastal adaptation. We also work in the renewable sector in the offshore world. But in the relevance of this, we do a lot of coastal and climate adaptation work for vulnerable coastal communities around the world. And I think what we see is, in light of the climate change, even in a 1.5 degree scenario, we know that millions and millions of people are going to be displaced in coastal communities. And although we work fundamentally in the marine sector, we see so much crossover between what we are learning and how to implement solutions in the marine sector, also very relevant for the freshwater sector, because water is so cross-cutting across so many different things. I will try not to repeat what has already been said, but I think specifically to touch on targets, what we see has been so well managed in the 1.5 degree pathway, translated down into how much emission budget everyone has, and that can even be translated on a company level or an organizational level. Of course, arguably easier because it's a very quantifiable discussion. And you see that very good organizations like the CDP, and I see they're a sponsor of this pavilion, so that's nice, the Carbon Disclosure Project, which is an organization which we annually report out under. It's not obligatory. We choose to do that as an organization, where we disclose our carbon emissions, what we are doing to reduce them, what is our governance mechanisms around that, how are decisions made. And we do our target setting through another mechanism, which is the Science-Based Target Initiative, or SBTI, and they help to translate the 1.5 degree pathway into manageable targets for every organization based on different sector guidelines. And what I would love to see, and I've said this last year at COP27 and at the UN Water Conference, is that an equivalent of this for water, also for biodiversity, by the way. And what we do see creeping into the CDP annual questionnaire are questions on biodiversity. They are not very specific yet, but the fact that we are being asked to start to talk about the impact that we have as an organization on biodiversity, I would love to see those questions for organizations as well on water. I think that would be really powerful. And I think fundamentally we started to think about, and I, again, not talking on behalf of all corporations, whether are we having positive impact on water. So as a business, we're not per se worrying that we have overuse of water. That's not a sector we work in, but is an organization having a net positive impact for too much water or too little water or pollution of water? And I think these are the questions that people should be asking organizations and business to report out on. And of course, a lot of organizations will push back and say we don't want more reporting, and I heard that on a country level is also a discussion for the GGA. Don't create another reporting burden. And that's the same argument for companies, but it's a fine line to walk, because reporting out also gives us an opportunity to step out and show that we are stepping out in front and making the right decisions and doing the right things also as a corporate organization. One final point I'd like to say on the target setting is a bit more on the legislative side. What we see now, for example, with the new CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive coming out of the EU, is that they have specifically set also reporting out elements on water. They have environmental standards for reporting. There are 6 of them: climate mitigation, climate adaptation, and also one on water. So you start to see water and adaptation coming up legislatively and in targets. But for me, don't come up with new things, just incorporate them into the existing mechanisms that are already there. But do please keep asking us the questions.
Great points there. Can I ask you just a brief follow-up question on how do you use targets in your programs, in your projects? Can you give some examples, just so we can visualize?
Yeah,
this?
so we actually have we call them key performance indicators. I get everyone uses different language, but we actually have an indicator that we use, which is about kilometers of coastline which we've protected. So we developed a tool called the Climate Risk Overview. It's a publicly available tool where we mapped data on low-lying land, populated areas, sea level rise, also some certain biodiversity ecosystems, mangroves, coral, and you can overlay all the layers and you can see for different sections of coastline how many people are fundamentally at risk as a result of different IPCC scenarios of sea level rise. And we use that data then for every project which we execute where we are fundamentally providing climate resilience to a certain section of coastline to say this is how many kilometers of coastline we've protected, and we report out on that every year, actually quarterly, internally, and annually, externally. And what I would love to see, but it's really, really tough, and I'm sure everyone here in the room will recognize, is we would like to translate that to how many people were impacted.
Right.
Because let's be honest, that's what's at the heart of this discussion, right? We want climate adaptation for people. And yeah, we would love to see that. And we see some organizations also struggling with the same question. The Environment Agency in the UK, for example, we work for them a lot. If we provide coastal protection in the UK, they also report out how many homes we've protected, how many people we've protected. We would like to see potentially that on a global level, if we could talk about how many people were protected by a water adaptation implemented solution.
Yeah. Fantastic. And then we do need to aggregate up globally how many people are protected, how many people are not, that we still need to meet. Great. We have a little bit of time for questions, so I want to open it up to the audience to see if there's any questions. And let's get the mic over. And we'll take a round of questions and then go back to our panelists for their expert answers and reflections.
My name is Henk Holtslag from Netherlands, and I work for water training centers in Africa. I have a question for Kate about the indicator, the SDG 6.1 indicator for safely managed is when you have pipe systems into the house. But we all know that in many countries in the world, even if you have pipe systems in the house, it's not always potable. So should we also not include household water treatment, like a water filter, to make sure that it is safe to the point of use?
Good question. And I think I saw another hand up. Yeah, we'll take a couple questions and then go for answers.
Thank you. This is just an observation and also a question. I've heard a lot of the conversation around aggregation of data and all of that moving up. I come from Papua New Guinea. That's a country in the Pacific. My one talk here from New Zealand will probably
tell
know
us your name too.
where that is. Sorry?
Tell us your name too.
Yes. So my name is Tureya. I work with World Vision, and I'm here with my friend Juliet and another partner from the Water for Women Fund who support the work we do. So just coming back to, I heard about the GLASS report and the JMP, so that's what we've done both of those. We've been part of the GLASS report cycle in Papua New Guinea. So my question is, and my concern, and also I think something that you've also faced in these sorts of conversations, is how we get data into these sorts of conversations from countries that don't really have that sort of information and information base to be able to feed into the wider conversations and the ones that make the decisions in these on these platforms. How do we represent the people in the communities that the decisions that are made at these on these platforms actually reach them? Because I know that the JMP for Papua New Guinea is an extrapolation for much of it, because a lot of the data is not existent. And that's something we've identified as a gap, and thankfully we're working on that. So we currently have a national information system being developed under the Water for Women Fund. So trying to close those gaps. So it's just, I think, for me, how do you also reconcile what's not really being reported in terms of, you know, non-existent data and the standards that I think one of the other panelists was talking about. So I know there's a need to aggregate data, but how do you reconcile standardizing, localization, and a sort of global standard? Is there a midpoint?
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot in there. I think, Kate, both of these questions aim towards you, but Joseph, I don't know if you want to comment also on the data issues from a national perspective, having to do this reporting. But I think we'll need the mic for Kate to be able to answer. Thanks.
Thank you. So on the first one, regarding safely managed drinking water supply, yeah, so for those of you that were familiar with the old MDG definitions of basic water supply, we now have safely managed, and the 3 criteria for that is it's on-premise, not necessarily piped, but on-premise, free from priority contamination, so normally E. coli, but maybe arsenic, fluoride, nitrogen, phosphorus, I think, where those are locally relevant, and available when needed. So those are the criteria, and that's measured at the water point, not at the household, but obviously there's plenty, I can't remember the number, but there's a lot of contaminated water points, and that really makes the case why we need household water treatment devices. So I think it's a complementary aspect of safely managed when it's not available safe at the tap. Yeah, very happy to see my Wontox from PNG. I don't know, as a Pacific Islander or on the edge of the Pacific in New Zealand, we get used to like people putting maps up and things, and they kind of crop off New Zealand and Australia and the Pacific. So I'm always like really happy to see other people from the region here. And yeah, and to your point about data, I think in the worst application of some of these data tools, they're very extractive. They go to countries, they demand data to be sent out, and some poor person is filling in a form and sending it off. That's what we want to get away from. I think the really strong narrative that's emerging in all of the WASH sector now is around the need for system strengthening, right? We have to have strong national and local level systems, and those data systems are part of it. And if we invest in building those local data systems, then they will inform the global instruments, right? It's not just a matter of like sending a form to Port Moresby or somewhere else and getting someone to fill it in. We have to really, as a sector, invest in system strengthening. And I think you point out that there are big data gaps already, right? And it's a big data demand on countries to do what's already asked of them. So it's not a light or insignificant thing to be proposing, new things to be adding in there. So it has to be done really thoughtfully in terms of what that data will actually tell us from a data to action kind of pathway. And then how do you integrate that into national systems? So, yeah, I think that's all I want to say on that. Thank you.
Thanks. I just want to see if, Joseph, you want to make any comments on these data issues as they're fundamental.
Yeah, the issue of data is actually a reality issue. In Zambia, we also face a similar challenge when we're trying to develop a MEL framework. Quite all right, we're able to devise some of the indicators But then to get baselines, baseline data, is been quite a challenge. And this is a challenge that will manifest going forward, provided we don't take deliberate steps to invest in, put in place tools, but also training or capacity building in terms of how to collect this data, how to analyze and report. So we need to invest in that area. If at all we have to do aggregation for it to work. So for many developing countries, the data issue is really, really a big challenge. Yeah, so that's what I can say. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, please come on in.
May I add very practical add-on? We are part of the UN Ocean Decade for exactly this reason, that there are thousands of corporates in this world that go around the world with their operations collecting a lot of data, and we joined the UN Ocean Decade for specifically this reason, to provide the data which we collect when we work all over the world, and bring that to science, so that science can actually leverage that and as you said, do something with that data so it's actually should be useful and lead to impact. That's one very practical thing. And I think the other thing is that advancement in technology, how can we leverage? So for biodiversity, we definitely see the use of satellite data now with coral monitoring is really powerful. So we don't need to always depend on having someone there on the ground to or just only for sort of truthing the data which we've sourced through satellite data. I don't know how applicable it is in your very specific example, but I just mean there are a lot of other ways to gather data, citizen data, etc., very practically. So try to definitely leverage stakeholder networks, etc., to do so.
Super. Thank you. We're going to go 2 quick questions, or did you want to come in on? Please come on in.
Yeah.
Carlos, please go ahead.
Just complementing on the experiences we're having, and particularly taking the base of what Animesh have presented about the characterization. So
Carlos, maybe just introduce yourself just briefly.
Sorry. My name is Carlos Uribe. I work with UNDRR. I'm part of the climate team, we call that. So we are working in the DRR Office of the United Nations, but liaising with the CCC Secretariat, giving some coherence between the two agendas. They send the framework for disaster reduction, and particularly the Paris Agreement on adaptation. So one of the good lessons learned, so Animesh was presenting this characterization, we have identified 302 hazards that are described. So standardization of which data will be collecting is one of the important things. But the good practice that we can take from what the work we are doing since 2015 is when we want to collect data, following the priority number 1 of the scientific framework, that there is knowledge, how to characterize and how to establish a baseline and really have the information to inform decision-making processes after. We need to have a national multi-stakeholder platform dedicated to data that involve the National Statistics Office. Because most of the time we are collecting data that is not recognized as an official information. So one of the good things establishing what this type of mechanism is having a stamp saying that this is official statistics coming from different sectors of the government, and involving water, but also housing, agriculture, because most of the time we have much data than we think, but it's in the Minister of Housing is here. So having a common basket is important, and also give this ownership to the national government. And particularly, we're insisting on giving responsibilities to the National Statistics Office that have a clear mandate in the government's mechanism to collect and analyze data. So this is a practice we are trying to reproduce in different countries, having this national platform, giving the tools on assessment, giving also the taxonomy on hazards we're having, and now we're including all that in disaster loss and damages databases, particularly including slow onset events. So just wanted to add that.
This is great. We can keep it going.
Can I do that?
Yeah, please, and tell us who you are.
Just in terms of collection of data and, my name is Taitusi. I'm from Fiji. I'm the permanent secretary for the Ministry of Infrastructure and Meteorological Services, Transport also. Just in terms of, as you mentioned, putting it in a sort of a centralized platform in government and collecting this data. What happens to this data in relation to the development or the implementation of projects? How long do you want to keep this data there? And when does decision making happen and when does implementation happen based on the data that has been collected?
This is a very good question because we are not taking the data. There is two different levels. So if we are talking about information and data about loss and damages, impacts or different phenomena, the thing we are doing is giving complete responsibility to the national authorities. So we are just helping to organize the structure, the data collection strategy, but the data owning stays at the country level. And no, it's not going to any server or whatever structure in the UN system. What is going to the UN system is the indicators through the ones they are reporting the progress on the implementation of an agenda. It's not data and information, it's not only numbers. It's, are we reducing the number of people affected? Are we reducing the number of people dead? Are we reducing the economic losses related? But we are not taking the data from the countries. It stays at the country level, managed by the national government, particularly by the National Statistics Office. So this is one of the main issues we were having because maybe 10 years ago we were recommending to establish databases that were centralized in a UN system or wherever. And this is this issue of the ownership of the data and also the vulnerability that represents to a country to share data that will have an idea or give an idea of fragility or wherever. So we are not taking any information. We are helping to structure a data collection strategy and a data collection tool that stays in the country. And I believe it's a very good practice.
Absolutely. Say?
I want to take, well, my name is Jose Gesti. I'm working with Sanitation and Water for All, supporting the development of today. Actually, I wanted to follow up on something that we have touched upon. So, Joseph, from managing the National Adaptation Plan in Zambia, you have, after a follow-up question from Christina, you have expressed interest in keeping a look on what is going on in the negotiations right now, because potentially what a potential water target you have expressed that may have a positive impact to steer the conversation at the national level in Zambia and cascade at the local level, which I find really interesting. And actually I wanted to ask to our colleague working for corporations, you have done a little bit of the reverse, right? You have said that in a positive way, that the targets that you are managing at the corporate level, you would love to see them kind of anchoring, right, in what is being discussed now. But I would like to ask you, what would it mean for corporations, having a water target that spells out, kind of ambition? Is the corporate sector willing and what is looking at what is going on here with the GGA, with the Global Goal on Adaptation? Are you keeping as a corporation a look on what it could happen and what it could mean at the corporate level to incorporate potential, to support the implementation of a potential target? Could you, because I also want to emphasize that during the session live, as we're speaking, a draft decision has been come out with a drafted target on water that it was read. I can read it out again.
I want to ask the group in the room, does this sound good enough, or would you want to see other elements incorporated?
So far, I will read the text decision that has been drafted with, as Alvin told us, with the first proposed thematic target being a water target that reads, achieving universal access to safe and affordable potable water and climate resilient water supply and sanitation, and significantly, climate-induced water scarcity and enhancing climate resilience to water-related hazards. This is a lot of the things there.
That's a lot.
Probably it's been a quick put together of different ones, but that's what we have on the table as we're speaking.
And a session at 4 p.m. that I'm gonna have to go to rather soon, but that's okay. But yeah, let's hear some reflections, and honestly, this can be a conversation with the whole room.
So I'm still thinking about the what you just read out. So I'm trying to think back. Your question is basically, do corporates want to see these targets? And I mean, I don't again speak on behalf of all corporates, and I expressed it's a very fine line, because we see as a result already, as the Paris Agreement on the emission side, a lot of reporting requirements coming down the pipeline to us. And what you don't want to create is an overbalance where corporates are so busy reporting, they're not actually doing the good work, right? But I mean, I would love to see those kind of goals. Also, from the flip side, that we work on the implementation side. And yeah, we would like to see more focused, more direct action on the places that need it the most, where we can bring in scalable solutions, working with nature, to provide resilience for communities. Because in the end, that's again where we're all trying to get to. So yes, we do want, but only when it actually results in action.
Joseph, can I ask you, did that goal, I know it was read out, but did that do it for you? Was that helpful?
Well, I'm still digesting.
Okay. Yeah.
So yeah,
It's a lot.
It's quite loaded, but I think we'll need to relook at that to see if it covers most of the critical elements. But I think the good part is at least we have something on water.
Yeah.
So that's something to
That's the
celebrate.
good-
Yeah.
yeah. And Kate, do you want to, does it do it for you?
Yeah. I mean, maybe I'm a bit cynical, but you sort of get used to being disappointed, right? But that had everything in it. It was like, wow, that's amazing. But
It is only the first one.
yeah, I know. That's we have to kind of manage. But no, I wanted to ask a question to Joseph because we were just talking before about the need for strengthening national data systems, and Zambia is like this amazing example of a very capable regulator in water and sanitation through NOWASCO that's been an example to the whole region. Could you envisage NOWASCO taking this up for Zambia in terms of the measurement? Or do you see another entity doing that?
Well, it depends. For certain data, of course, NOWASCO can take it up because it also follows with a mandate of the institution, because there are a number of institutions. We also have WAMA, which is the Water Resources Management Authority. So probably this one could even be the right institution that can take this up. Yeah, but it's an issue that still requires a bit of dialogue, because as one speaker spoke, I think we also have the statistical agency. So there's certain data that they could also collect, especially that they interact with the communities and they do census and these other households and economic surveys. They could also pick up some of the data. But I think what is key is kind of dialogue and agree on what sort of indicators or data can be picked for by the different institutions. So it's something that we might need to look at. Thanks.
Super. Thank you. I think we'll draw it to a close unless there's there are burning questions. Okay, let's keep going, if that's okay.
I want to save Christina because I want to say that Christina has to run actually to meet with as observer with the party. So you are excused, Christina. Yeah. And we really want to thank you. I can carry on now, but yeah, I will do. But thanks so much to Christina. Please, an applause for her. Please, okay, we can continue there. Yeah.
Well, my name is Dr. Jibril Semakula Omugisha, and from Uganda. Out of the very many partners we have here, I don't see a partner who is into plastic production and distribution. We are talking about people and the planet. And you are very much aware that the largest amount of plastics in saturation, it is in water, landfills. We are now consuming it biologically. We are developing some cells, abnormal cells, into our bodies. So I'm internally wondering if we really keep moving without any of these partners who are into plastic production and distribution globally. Will we achieve the agenda? We may partially achieve the agenda, but the largest impact of these plastics may not be achieved as far as the water protection is concerned. I happen to be the Uganda's representative to you any decade on ecosystem restoration. Thank you very much.
Thanks for the intervention, and we really take note. I would like to ask you back, actually, you know, since we are talking about targets and the text is being drafted as we speak, what would be your addition to the target that it's on the table right now? How could you complement the text with a narrative that it could make sense to you to get that? Because we are in this point where we are going to be crossing on the corridors with those that they are drafting the text. We should be ready if we approach them, and if they are having the time to meet with us, we should tell them in a few words, what is it, then what would be the narrative that you would like to see in such a target? Could you, I put the question back to you, how could you summarize in one sentence what you need to see as a target?
We can talk about reuse, talk about refuse, reuse, recycle. That is enough to at least manage plastic production and pollution globally.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you. I think we're good. Kate wants to take the, yeah.
Don't know how I ended up with this.
It fell into you.
Well, I'm a sanitation person, so of course I was looking for the sanitation piece in there, and as usual, it was just like one word, water and sanitation services, right? So we could extend on that idea and talk about sources of pollution to waterways being, you know, untreated wastewater, being unmanaged plastics and so forth as a kind of an extension.
Solid waste.
Yeah, it's a solid and all forms of water pollution, right, including solid waste and liquid pollution.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so I don't know if there are further questions. I think we've gone a long way with these two panel discussions today. This puts an end to the second panel. Just to remind you, just in 30 seconds, I mean, now we try to be brief right in what we say. If I have to summarize, we have seen the water security sector. We have heard this morning in the panel one on how climate change is having an impact on different dimensions of water security that goes from water and sanitation, the ecosystems, the water-related hazards and the communities, and the food and energy nexus. And we have now gone through the metrics. What we have discussed right now is what are the existing frameworks, what are the targets that we have on the table, and do they make can we use them as a baseline to draft global goal on adaptation targets? The solution is being unpacked as we speak, and the first draft has been released during this session. So here's where we are. Let's see what happens in the next few days. We will be landing on an agreed text in a few days, so we will know what is the answer. But we are still on time to provide inputs. Thank you very much. Okay, and thanks to our panelists. Big thanks to all the panelists. Thank you. So we are going to have a little bit of a pause now, and we will come back with the next session, which is going to be a country roundtable in some minutes.